So I shot this probably at golden hour in a really dark foliage kind of tree farm, and I brought continuous light. And I just wanted to show you how to really play with colors and how to pull out your shadows and drop down your highlights and create a bit of a magical image. So I thought it would be a fun little thing for you to watch today. So right now I'm just in Adobe Camera Raw, and this is straight out of the camera. First thing I'm going to do is look at the environment. So I'm not looking at our model. I feel like she's lit perfectly and I really love the light on her. Her leg is too bright and her hand, but we can adjust that. But right now, I'm just looking at the environment. So first thing, pull down our highlights because, again, I'm not looking at her. I'm just looking at this grass spot right here. And we're going to do this in 2 steps or so. So just to begin, down here are your settings. So if you click on it, you're going to see your color space, and I always work in Adobe RGB 1998, and I always work in 16-bit, and I always open up as smart objects. And the reason for that is because then it maintains its digital capacity. So that means that I can add more layers and I can come in and adjust them each individually as a separate photo as opposed to just working on one image. So that's why I'm just going to work on the background. So I'm going to pull up my shadows, bringing some light back into the trees here. Pull up my blacks a little bit, not too much. Pull my contrast back just a smidge, like so. And clarity's, I'm going to dial it back a bit, just a little bit to soften it a bit more without adding blur. And yeah, so let's go into our color mixer. And in my saturation, I'm going to pull my greens back. And this is personal preference, but I do like to change the tone of my greens to a cooler, less yellow so that it looks more like nighttime. You can come into your hue and you can adjust your greens. Now I wouldn't pull it to the left because that's going to add some light back. If you pull it to the right, then you're going to get more blues in them like that. So it's just, again, personal preference. I think I'm going to leave it right about there. And I think that's a good place to start. So I'm going to click Open Object, and then I'll show you what I do next. Okay, now what I'm going to do is right-click and choose New Smart Object via Copy. So that is not the same image as the one beneath. So I can double-click on it. It opens back up in Adobe Camera Raw. And now I can focus on our subject. So what I'm going to do is come in here and reset to default. So it starts right back where it was. And now I'm only looking at her. So go to Basic, reduce your highlights, because I'm just looking at her leg, right? So right there, it's perfect, but it's not perfect on her. But at the same point, now I can work in another layer. So what I'm going to do here is just hold down my Alt or Option key, click Mask, and what I'm going to do is come in and just brush that onto her leg right about here. Like so. Okay. Same thing. New Smart Object via Copy. And this time I'm going to pull it above that one. And I'm going to double click and go back into it. And bring my highlights back up. Actually, no. Sorry. Let's reset to open again. Reset to default, sorry. Okay, so now I'm going to pull the highlights back, and I'm only looking at her face and her hand. That looks good. So while we're in here, we're going to come back down to Color Mixer and click on Saturation and pull those yellows back and the oranges down a little bit. Something like that. Okay, click Open. Option mask, and now I can paint that effect onto her face. So basically it's just bringing those bright lights and highlights back without creating too much light. Just adding a little bit back onto her leg. And I might even paint some of this darkness contrast back in the foreground here. Okay, so I think that's good. All right, so now I'm just going to flatten it, and now we can begin everything else. Okay, so when I'm in something like this, I would do a quick retouch on her skin, but for this, I'm just going to do a really quick edit so that you can see, you know, what you can do. First thing I'm going to do is duplicate my layer. I'm going to grab my patch tool, and I'm just going to zoom in on her hand because I see some dirt, right? So I'm just going to get rid of the dirt. Take a look if there's any blemishes and just get rid of those super quick. I think she's got a Marilyn Monroe vibe in this picture. I like it. Okay, let's get rid of her piercing, and I'd say that's pretty good. The odd bump and lump, but other than that, she looks pretty good. Okay. Okay, so flatten, duplicate. I'm just gonna jump in really quick to liquefy because I always like to fluff up the hair. I usually take out lumps and bumps around the body, but everything else looks perfect. Okay. Okay, so that added a little bit of oomph. I'm just going to add a layer mask, and I'm going to come in and I'm just going to paint around the head, and all that does is get rid of any changes that I made to the environment because we don't want it to look like I pushed, right? Just going to paint that back out because it looked better before. Okay. So like that, go ahead and flatten. And we're just going to come in with our dodge and burn and get rid of a couple of shadows. So white brush and flow at 1%. And if you zoom in a little bit, not too much, you'll be able to see where the shadows are. Like, oop, I'm on burn. Like right here. And if you use your dodge at 1%, you can just get rid of any little shadows that you don't want on the face or any other part of the body. And we're human beings, so we all have these same shadows regardless of what weight we're at. But we do tend to minimize them a bit, especially when you're using light, because it really will show all of these little shadows. And if you don't like doing skin retouching, if you don't want to have that over softened look, a lot of times you can just use this technique and it's enough. This is a little dark. Just going to add a little bit of light back into her hand, because we did remove some of it with the removal of the dirt. Just going to soften the shadow a bit, and the one right in her eye crease. Okay, that looks better. Just going to zoom out and show you the before and after. So do you see? And that's just using 1% flow. And what we've done is we've essentially removed, any shadows that might be pulling your eye away from the overall image. So it helps to zoom out. Just zoom out, and then you're going to see what else you maybe need to do. Now, normally, because I've done this as a retouching layer, I won't come in and start doing my global dodging and burning, because in case I have to adjust the opacity of the layer, I don't want to affect the global changes that I've made. So just zoom out and look where else you might need to lighten spots and bruises or shadows. Okay, so before and after. Go ahead and flatten, and I'm going to do another round of dodging and burning. This time it's going to be more my global. I will come in and use my Luminosity Lumenzia software, because I really do quite enjoy the global dodging and burning that it does really quickly, and I know I've showed you that before. By working with 1% flow, you just have a lot more control over what you do. And, conversely, you can come in and do the same thing with your burn layer. So this is a really bright spot right there. We can come in with our burn layer and fix that the same way we did. So we're just adding little highlights. And just remember, the more specular you want the highlight to be, just make your brush that much smaller. So I'll show you this really bright spot here. What we're going to do is just come in and paint it away with our burn layer. So the color might not match perfectly, but if you come in afterwards with frequency separation, it'll be perfectly fine. Okay? If you want. I'm just going to add a little bit of light. And by adding a little bit of light on the top of the breast like this, it adds a bit of fullness if you want. Now I'm adding highlights to her brow bone and her cheekbone. Always like to add highlights to the hair. Okay, I'd say that looks pretty good. Now on my burn layer, let's just come in and deepen her eyebrow a little bit. I'm going to actually bump up my flow on this to 5. And this just adds contrast back. So I use this especially if you want to deepen the makeup a little bit. Zoom out a bit. And also if you wanted to just burn in some more shadows, just add some of that contrast back. Okay. Okay. So that's the before and after for the burn. So I'm just, see now, if I go ahead and do this, then I undo all the spots and stuff that I've done. So I really don't want to do that. So for this, if you want to minimize it, you have to come back and paint it off. And it's a little heavy for my taste here. So I'm just going to reduce it a bit because I don't want to undo all the changes I did on the chest and all that other stuff. Okay, so close the group, before and after, and at this point now you can reduce the whites, the highlights a bit if you need. Right about there looks good. Go ahead and flatten, and now I'm just going to do one really quick pass with Lumenzia just to really pop her out. So here's my Lumenzia, hold down my shift key, hit my curves, and it's going to create luminosity masks in curves adjustments. Okay, so in the highlights, which is the top one, this is where we can really create the highlights. And what I usually do is I'll just hold down my Alt or Option key and add a layer mask to that so that I can really come in and paint it on where I want it to be. Because you're not going to want it to be everywhere you saw it being affected. You just want to be able to place it yourself where you feel like you might want a little bit more highlight without, you know, doing it all by hand. I love this plugin. I'm not sponsored but I really, really love it. I've been using it for years. They made it mostly for landscape photographers, but I find that it works great. Okay, so that's the highlights. So you can see we've just added that, and you can pull it back if it's a bit much, or conversely you can paint it off. And I'm going to click on the second to last and just pull that up a bit, and this is just for the environment, right about here. Same thing, alter option, mask, and now I can come in and I can paint a little bit more misty light on the top portion of this image, just for, you know, a little bit of effect. And what else do we want to do? Let's do this one, it's the middle one. We can pull that up a bit or pull it down, see which one is better for the image. Kind of like it there. Alter option, and let's just paint it around the perimeter here, just for a little bit of contrast. Close the group, before and after. I think that's good enough. I got what I wanted out of it. Flatten. Okay, I'm going to show you a little technique. So there's some yellow in her hair. Let's just open up a hue saturation layer and go to our yellows. And this is so powerful. So if you pull a saturation all the way to the left, then you remove all the warmth in the image. That's yellow. So I'm just going to invert that mask, and I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to paint that yellow off of her hair, because her hair was toned to be, you know, almost like a purpley platinum, and it's really hard to do that. So I'm just going to remove the yellow altogether from her hair. Her hand here is pretty yellow too, I noticed, so I'm going to actually see if I can get rid of the yellow this way, and it worked pretty good. Right? Do we have any yellow anywhere else that we want to get rid of? No. Okay, that looks pretty good. Flatten, and at this point I would do a bit of frequency separation on her face normally. I just want to show you the overall edit and not really get into the retouching side of it. But just keep in mind that's what I typically would do. So let's go into color toning. Selective color. So in our blacks, this is where you can choose to make them warm like this, or choose to make them even more cyan. It's entirely up to you. But for this one, I'm going to use a -5 in the reds. I'm not going to add yellow back because then we undo everything we've done. I do like adding in a bit of blue with those reds. So -3 on the yellow. And I think that looks really cool. So let's go into our neutrals. She already has some red and yellow in her skin, so we don't really want to. If I go more yellow, I'm trying to stay away from that, but at the same time, I don't want to add blue, because then we get into pink skin, which is not what I want. If we go too red, then she turns too red. If we go a little bit to the cyan, then that kind of adds to the more like magic of the evening, right? And at least it's not turning her skin yellow. So right about there, we can pull it down a bit or pull it up, but definitely about +1, I think is good. Now back in the blacks, I'm just going to add a little bit of matte, so maybe a -3. That looks cool. So that's before and that's after. We've just softened it a bit. At this point too, what's fun sometimes is you can just kind of paint that off of her face, especially if you want to keep that contrast and the focus on her. Okay, that looks good. Flatten, and now we're going to go back into our hue saturation. and go to our greens, and I'm going to pull that green way down. And I'm going to go back into the yellows and pull that yellow way down, right about there. And I'm going to invert that, and I'm going to paint off this bright green. Like that. Just gonna feather that mask out. Go ahead and flatten. I'm gonna put a blank layer, overlay blend mode, and I'm gonna grab a nice gold color. Something like that. So back here, as you can see, we have a bit of sunset. So just add a little bit of that sun glow. I'm going to put my flow down a little lower, and then I can just kind of sprinkle this around. Mostly where the bokeh is. So if I make my light just a little bit, color just a little bit lighter, I can really come in and affect the edges of the hair as if this light was really highlighting it. So now I'm just adding a little bit more light to the background. And that's the difference, right? So, and you can do the same thing. Let's say you wanted it to be more blue. you could do the same thing. But what I'm going to do now is add a blank layer above, change my blend mode to color, and I'm just going to come in and paint off some of that bright yellow. I really want more of the light, like highlights on her hair as opposed to the yellow. Let's just pull this back a bit to about there. All right, guys. I'm flattening it. And now we're just going to add a little lantern. So this is the lantern that I chose to insert, and I already cut it out. So I'm just going to drag it onto the image and transform and bring it down to about here. We're going to put it right here. Okay, so when you add something, oh, I can see around it, can't I? I'm going to change the blend mode to darken, no, multiply. No, I'm just going to add a layer mask and brush that off. Sometimes it's hard to get rid of a white background, I find, but this will be fine. Good enough. I'm just going to turn this into a smart object and then rasterize it. Okay, so new layer underneath that, just a black brush, and we're just going to paint a bit of a shadow underneath. So when you're placing a shadow underneath something in Photoshop, what you need to do is create your base shadow like so. But then you also need to do that on top of it. I'm just going to reduce the base shadow a bit. Like right about here. And then what I'm going to do is a new blank layer above, and I'm going to sample one of the darker colors in here and change my brush to a grass brush right here. Pull up the flow and just add a little bit of grass. Choose a lighter color. And then just grab a regular brush, regular soft one, so that it's a thicker, and then you can just kind of add a few. And because it's light, we're going to add a couple of more highlighted ones. And that's too bright, so let's just tone it down. Just going to grab this little brush here. Pull this up so that they're a little more defined. I do want a little bit more light green. I'm just gonna do this on a new layer so that I can reduce the opacity easier. Now I can pull that back. Okay, we need to go back to our lamp. So this is our lamp. And what we need to do is do a curves adjustment and clip it beneath right here. And I'm just gonna create more contrast in the lamp. So a little contrast curve like so. Okay, that's great. And what I want to do now is I need to create light behind it. So I'm just going to add a blank layer on top of the base layer, and I'm going to change my blend mode to overlay, and I'm going to grab a color. This lamp is going to be on the cooler side, so we're going to do probably a blue, something like that. Change my brush to soft, and right now I'm just looking at putting this kind of behind as a light source. And if it doesn't work, it's fine, I can change it after. Add a little bit more bright, like that. And now on top of this layer, blend mode to overlay. Now we can come in and add a little bit of light this way. Right, pull it back. Definitely pull this one back. Just want it a little bit. Increase my contrast a bit more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flatten. Now I'm going to open up a dodge burn. Click on my burn, pull my flow down to 10-ish. And once again, just come in and maybe create a little bit of darkness around the base. Okay, that looks pretty good. Go ahead and flatten. So now what we're going to do is we're going to grab a warmer color, like about a gold, somewhere in here. gradient, radial, and probably 45. Pull that over, dither, change blend modes, try screen. Let's go to overlay first. Duplicate that layer, Control J, and turn it down to 30. Click OK and change the blend mode to screen and reduce. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll put the screen underneath the overlay. And then reduce the overlay. Like that. And then what you have to do is come in and do another curves adjustment. Clip it. I guess we can't clip it. So pull that down. Pull that up a bit. And then invert it. So Command I. And then you can paint more of that contrast. Just pull that up onto the area. Like so. Now we're going to go ahead and flatten it. And I haven't done any retouching on her. We just did some dodging and burning and all that other stuff. So now we're just going to go ahead and color tone the whole image again. So into our blacks, let's try red. Let's try adding in a bit of magenta, bit of blue. Come into our neutrals, add some yellow, a little bit of red, come into our whites, we're going to add some blue, let's try yellow. So that's before and after. Go ahead and flatten. Let's run it through exposure and see what we get. Definitely don't want to choose a filter that takes all of the color away because the colors are pretty. But what I love about exposure is it really gives it kind of a film look to it. Adds a lot of really pretty contrast. I always come in and reduce the grain because the grain is always really heavy to start. But especially if you've over retouched skin and it's too soft, grain will really help bring back some texture. And just hit your space bar and you can see what it looks like before and after, so you can see what you want to do. But I typically will come in and just adjust the opacity. So adding a vignette could help. Click apply. and reduce. So that's before and that's after, and I think that's enough. That's at about 47% or so. You can come into your hue saturation and adjust your yellows. So this yellow is a bit yellow. So you can come in and you can change the hue to a warmer color by just pulling it to the left, which actually I think does look a little bit better than the yellow. But let's just look and see what it affected. Just want to make sure it doesn't turn her too red. So I'm just going to make sure that I paint that effect off of her skin because I really don't want her to be too red. But it did help. See? So now we've reduced those greens and made it look a little bit more magical. Go ahead and flatten. And now if you wanted to, you could come in and just matte it up a bit. So add a little bit of matte to the image, like that. I'll usually come in and just paint the effect off the subject a bit so that she stands out a bit more. Like so. Reduce it a bit. And one more pass at color toning and we're done. So in the blacks, I'm going to add a little bit more magenta, maybe a little bit of red, not too much, and a little bit of blue again. And that's it. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I will probably come in and retouch her skin a bit and post that at the end of this video, but I hope you got some tips and tricks out of it. And until the next video, I will see you then.